Hello everyone, and welcome back to Conspiraseed. Today we're going over part 2 of Tier 7 of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. Tier 7 is the longest tier so far, so it's broken up into 3 separate parts. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today, and let's just get into part 2 of Tier 7.
Nothing like being subscribed to Conspiraseed on YouTube. Nothing like it.
Occurring in Singapore on January 6, 1979, the Geylang Bahru family murders is the murder of 4 children of the same family, the Tan family. At 6:35 a.m., Tan Chai and Li Ying, the children's parents, left for work. They worked for a bus company that would transport children to school. The couple's children, ages 5 through 10 at the time, were all still asleep. Around 7:10 a.m., Li Ying called home to wake up her children for school. However, there was no answer. She called a total of 3 times. She then called the neighbor to see if she could go knock on the door to wake up the children. The neighbor knocked on the door, but also received no answer. The couple returned home shortly after 10 a.m., and Li Ying found the bodies of her children in the bathroom. The children had been stacked on top of each other, wearing only t-shirts and underwear, and had knife wounds on their heads. The right arm of the oldest child had been almost completely cut off, and the youngest child had slash wounds on her face. The report said that the children had 20 slash wounds each. The police concluded that the murders were premeditated, and that the killer, or killers even, had made sure not to leave any evidence. There were bloodstains in the kitchen sink, and the killer appeared to have cleaned themselves prior to leaving the house. There was no evidence of forced entry, the house hadn't been destroyed or ransacked, and no items were reported missing. The murder weapon is believed to either be a dagger, like a knife, or a cleaver. The murder weapon's also never been found. The oldest boy, the one whose arm was almost cut off, appeared to have put up a fight, as there were several strands of long hair found in his right hand. While no motive has ever been identified, the police thought the murder was purely vengeance motivated. The police also believed that the killer was either close with the family or had intimate family knowledge of their circumstances. Li Ying had a surgery to have her tubes tied so that she could no longer have children after her 4th child. And 2 weeks after the murder, the couple received a Chinese New Year card depicting happy children playing, and inside was written, "Now you can have no more offspring, ha ha ha," in Chinese. The card was signed, the murderer. So, as the name would suggest, the February 2007 Salvadoran Congressman killings were the murders of 3 Salvadoran congressmen and their driver occurring on February 19th, 2007. This is actually just the start of many killings revolving around this case. The 3 congressmen were on their way to Guatemala City to attend the Central American Parliament. Their Land Cruiser, part of a 4-car motorcade, headed to the capital, pulled out of the convoy and onto a remote road about 20 miles southeast of Guatemala City. So this kind of to me is very suspicious. Why did no one else in the convoy go, "Hey, where are they going?" and follow them? The car's in a convoy of 4 cars, and none of the other 3 cars went, "Hey, wait a minute." The bodies were found the next day in the vehicle, and the vehicle was charred and burnt. There were also indications that they had been tortured before their death. Soon after the murders, 4 Guatemalan police officers were arrested. They had been tracked by a GPS system embedded into the police car that was on the scene of the killings. All were formally charged in connection to the murders, and they were secretly moved to a maximum security prison. A few days later, on February 25th, all 4 men were murdered within their prison cell. The killings were followed by a prison riot, with the warden and some guards being taken hostage. Initial reports suggested that the gunman entered the prison disguised as a visitor. The state police, however, stated that it was more likely that the gunman came from inside the prison, since it would have been almost impossible for them to have gotten past all 3 layers of security perimeters, including the prison guards, the national police, and the army. 20 men at the prison were arrested, including the warden and many guards. In early of March 2007, a top police official resigned his position and fled the country with his family, seeking first asylum in Costa Rica and then in Venezuela. He was involved in arresting the 4 officers and claimed to be in fear for his life. He and his family then fled to Austria and were granted asylum. In late March of 2007, both the chief of the National Police and the Interior Minister resigned. On April 8, 2008, Victor Rivera was shot and killed while driving in Guatemala City just 2 days after he was fired from his position with the Ministry of the Interior, where he was investigating the deaths of the 4 deputies. The person investigating his murder was immediately accused of conducting a cover-up and arrested. No other movement on this case has happened. The Seawin murder case is one of the biggest Swiss crime cases and is the biggest Swiss murder case. The killings took place during the holiday of Pentecost, a Christian holiday that I wasn't aware of that takes place 50 days after Easter in 1976. The holiday happens every year, not just in 1976. This case happened in 1976. 5 people were killed with a Winchester rifle, with a total of 13 bullets being fired. 11 of the 13 bullets hit the heads of the victims and the other 2 hit the chest. The 5 victims were Elsa, age 62, her husband Eugene, age 63, Eugene's sister Anna, aged 80, Anna's son Emmanuel, age 52, and Anna's other son Max, age 49. The bodies were found by a woman who was out on a walk. When the police arrived, they found 4 corpses in their rented house, with the 5th being wrapped in a carpet on the balcony. The police suspected that only Elsa and Eugene were supposed to be killed, but then the killer was surprised when they entered the house and there were 3 other people there that he now had to kill too. There are 2 main suspects in this case, the first being a person named Carl Dozer. The gun that was identified as the weapon used to kill the victims was found hidden in the walls of his kitchen. He had bought the gun in 1973, and earlier when he'd been interviewed by the police, he lied and said that he had sold the gun. He was never charged because a clear motive for the killings couldn't be found, and he didn't even know the victims. While no charges were filed, the majority of the Swiss population believes that he is the killer. The second suspect is a man named Adolf Siegrist, a man who is actually related to the victims. He was put on the list by his co-worker Hans Blazer. Hans felt that Adolf was the culprit and Carl Dozer helped him. Adolf had been seen purchasing ammo 3 weeks before the crime and asked for ammunition with extra heavy lead bullets and asked if the rounds would fit in his Italian Winchester rifles. He also mentioned that he was purchasing the ammo for someone else. There were also styrofoam heads in his apartment that had been shot through. The motive for him would remain unknown as well, but it's thought that he was mad at the couple for giving him the nickname Dolfelli, which is a belittling name for Adolf. Also, I don't know the Swiss accent, that's why I gave it an Italian accent. It sounded very Dolfelli. It's not Dolfeli, sounds very Italian. He was arrested temporarily, but died in the mid-1980s. On October 8th, 2014, a co-worker of Jin Chen found the bodies of Jin, his wife, and their 2 children in their home in New York. Police were called to the scene and determined that the family had been killed sometime in the hours before dawn that day with either a knife or a hammer. I'm not sure how you can look at a body and say, oh, this was either killed with a knife or a hammer. I feel like those would leave 2 very different wounds. I haven't seen the bodies, so I can't entirely say, but I feel like they would leave 2 very different wounds. When Jin had not arrived for work at the King's Walk restaurant and also hadn't called to say that he wasn't coming in or that he would be late, one of his coworkers went to his house a half-mile from the restaurant. His coworker rushed back to the restaurant after finding the body and asked another coworker to call 911 since his English was extremely limited. The police responded and began to seal off the crime scene and were assisted by the New York State Police and their detectives. Police were slow to release information, and much of what was reported in the early days of the case came from the family relatives. Jin's brother told reporters that his brother's body had been found on the first floor of his small bungalow house, while the other members of the family were found upstairs, covered by a blanket. He denied an early report that they had been shot, and later details emerged that the victims had been beaten with a hammer, and later accounts also mentioned that they were stabbed. I guess that's where it comes from. I don't know why earlier in some of the articles I read, it's it was either a hammer or a knife, and here it's mentioning both. The crime came as a shock to the small suburb, which was normally quiet. The town's chief of police said that she had never seen anything like it. She said that she had not only grown up in the town, but in the neighborhood where the Chens lived, which made it more personal to her. As people know, the first 48 hours of an investigation is the most crucial period. There's a whole TV show called 48 about this. Local law enforcement said that the investigation was slow during this time, however, as, quote, there were so many cultural impediments, language barriers, and an overwhelming sense of fear among the members of the local Chinese immigrant community that detectives attempted to talk to. No home or business nearby had security cameras that would have provided any footage to review. From the beginning, there were allegations that the Chens had been involved in illegal business activities such as human trafficking, money laundering, or illegal gambling. However, none of this has been confirmed. Okay, so despite the name, this actually has nothing to do with the city of San Francisco in the state of California, but a train called the City of San Francisco, which was a cross-country passenger train running from Oakland, California to Chicago, Illinois, and back. At the time, the train was traveling west from Chicago to Oakland, but it was behind schedule by about a half hour. After leaving Carlin, Nevada, the engineer increased the speed to 90 miles per hour to make up some time. At 9:33 p.m., the train hit a patch of rail that had been deliberately moved out of alignment and then camouflaged with a brown paint and tumbleweeds, derailing the train while it crossed the number 4 bridge into the Humble River Gorge. The engineer of the train survived and ran to the closest telephone to contact emergency services. Volunteers from both the cities of Poway and Carlin rushed to the scene with medical supplies, but survivors were not taken to the hospital until a rescue train was assembled and took them to Elko, Nevada the next morning. A total of 5 cars on the train were destroyed: a 32-seat coffee shop kitchen car, a 72-seat diner, a buffet lounge car, and 2 sleeper cars. 24 people total were killed and 121 were seriously injured. In the following days, divers discovered tools in the Humboldt River, showing they had been an act of sabotage. Investigators estimated that it would take a strong person about an hour to move the tracks, and they noted that the previous train passed through the area 4 hours before. Southern Pacific, who owned and operated the railway, put out a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the perpetrators, and it was eventually increased to $10,000. A number of lone hobos were arrested, but investigators argued that it was more than likely carried out by 2 or more people, and they would have to have extensive knowledge of railroad operations. The arrests and interrogations led nowhere. To this day, this wreck remains the deadliest train disaster in Nevada history. The 1894 Rock Island Railroad wreck occurred when a train pulling 2 passenger cars derailed on August 19, 1894 in Lincoln, Nebraska, killing 11 people. The train, which had departed on a nearly 2-hour journey at around 7:30 p.m., derailed just minutes away from its destination at 9:20 p.m. The train reached a 400-foot bridge that carried trains 40 feet above the waters of the Salt Creek. The bridge began to bend as the engine crossed onto it, and as the passenger cars began to cross, the weight became too much, and the train crashed into the creek below. When it hit the bottom, the engine exploded, spilling hot coals on both the train and the wooden bridge, and soon flames engulfed both. 3 men were able to escape the crash quickly and organized an effort to rescue other passengers. The 3 determined that the passengers in the first car and the engine were beyond help and focused on the rear car, from where they were able to rescue 15 passengers. The first building that could be seen from here was the state penitentiary 2 miles away, from which they called the fire and police departments as well as the railroad. A train reached the scene about 40 minutes after the crash to carry the survivors on to Lincoln. Due to the equipment and conditions at the time, no fire wagons could reach the site, and it was reported that the only thing that they could do was just let the whole pile burn out. Of the 33 passengers on board, 11 were killed in the crash. Survivors of the crash began to tell police that, following the crash, they had seen an unknown man holding a lantern near the bridge. This, along with some evidence found at the scene, suggested that the crash was not simply an accident, but sabotage. The police arrested a man who was believed to be the man with the lantern, George Washington Davis. However, there was almost no evidence to suggest that he was the perpetrator. He never admitted any involvement, and investigators couldn't offer an explanation of motive. Despite all of this, he was tried twice for sabotage. During the first trial, first-degree murder couldn't be proven, and the jury couldn't reach a verdict. During the second trial, the jury was informed by the judge that if the prosecutors failed to prove his guilt of first-degree murder, the jury could convict the defendant of second-degree murder. In 1895, he was convicted of second-degree murder. 10 years later, the governor paroled Davis, citing lack of evidence or motive and grave doubts as to his involvement. This is both one of the largest instances of mass murder and the largest officially unsolved crime in not only Lincoln, Nebraska, but Nebraska as a whole. On December 29, 1975, A bomb detonated near the TWA baggage claim terminal in LaGuardia Airport in New York City. The blast killed 11 people and 74 more were seriously injured. Investigators believe the explosion was the equivalent of 25 sticks of dynamite, and it had been placed in a coin-operated locker located next to the baggage carousel. The bomb blew the lockers apart, sending fragmentations of the lockers flying across the room. The force of the bomb ripped a 10-foot by 15-foot hole in the 8-inch reinforced concrete ceiling of the area. The resulting fire in the terminal took over an hour to get under control. The death toll actually could have been much worse, but most of the passengers had already left the baggage claim, and the main victims were unfortunately airport employees. Following the explosion, airports throughout the country were evacuated after receiving hoax bomb threats. There were many groups that were thought to have been linked to the attack, including the Palestine Liberation Organization, the Mafia, the FALN, and the Jewish Defense League. However, there was nothing to tie any of these organizations to the bombing other than a past history of violence. The Butcher of Mons is an unidentified serial killer who committed 5 murders between January of 1996 and July of 1997 in or near the Belgian city of Mons. On March 22, 1997, a police officer discovered 9 garbage bags containing human remains. They were examined by a magistrate who determined that the arms and legs in the bags were from 3 different bodies, all of whom were women. On March 24th, a 10th bag was discovered containing the chest of a woman. On April 12th, 2 bags were found that contained a foot, a leg, and a head. The victims were 43-year-old Carmelina Rousseau, 43-year-old Martine Bon, 33-year-old Jacqueline Laclerc, 21-year-old Natalie Goddard, and 37-year-old Bigona Valencia. A special investigation unit was created to solve the murders. However, the unit reported that they had lack of staffing from the case because it was considered a local case, and since 2007, the units only consisted of 4 investigators. During this investigation, several people were suspected of being involved in the murders, but no concrete evidence was ever found against any of them. And that is part 2 of Tier 7 of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to share it with someone else that you think would enjoy. Feel free to leave a like, and if you haven't already, remember to hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some time with me today. It really does mean a lot. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.